I'm Paul Gatling with the Northwest Arkansas Business Journal. The federal investigation of Wal-Mart into alleged violations of the Federal Corrupt Practices Act has been going on for almost 6 years. But a resolution could be coming. And joining me today to discuss is Dr. Alan Ellstrand. He's Associate Dean in the Walton College of Business at the University of Arkansas. Dr. Ellstrand, thanks for being here.
Really happy to be here, Paul.
Now, a big part of your research and expertise is corporate governance.
It is.
Executive leadership, big public companies. So put that lens on this story. You know, that news broke in the New York Times in early 2012. Wal-Mart was allegedly engaging in some bribery and other illegal activities in emerging markets like Mexico and Brazil, India. So the news that came out last week is that the retailer set aside about $283 million in anticipation of a possible resolution to this ongoing probe. So just kind of give us some background on the seriousness of the allegations and maybe how the investors have viewed those through the years.
Absolutely. Well, you know, the Foreign Corrupt Practices Act was a pretty controversial act when it was adopted back in the late 1970s. It really holds U.S. companies to a much higher standard than other companies in the world. And frankly, some U.S. companies said, we don't want to play to those standards. You know, it's going to give us a competitive disadvantage. But, you know, it's still in effect today. And I think over time, companies have adapted pretty well to it. I think when the news broke about Walmart, it was shocking in a lot of ways because we think of Walmart as somebody who plays by the rules, who really sets high standards for the people they deal with. And when it came across that Walmart was not playing by our rules, it had some effect. So it definitely had an effect on the stock price. Investors didn't look favorably at that. I think to a degree, there was a little bit of concern. Is this, you know, if Walmart's doing this, could they be engaged in other activities that we're unaware of? I think it also had kind of a carryover effect to the vendor community. Some of the vendor companies who had been held to those really high standards by Walmart said, well, if you're not playing by the rules, why should we? And, you know, Walmart vendors really need Walmart to be a strong company. And when Walmart's kind of future is threatened a little bit, as it was in this case, I think that sent some pretty strong shockwaves through the vendor community as well as the investor community.
Right, and talk about the supplier partners of Walmart and the cloud that this has had, you know, in their regard. They're held to notoriously high ethical standards. So, you know, how have they viewed maybe this long-running probe the last few years?
You know, again, I think it undermined a little bit of confidence that they had in Walmart and made them kind of look in the mirror and say, hey, you know, Walmart's really holding us to a high standard. You know, why are we doing this if Walmart itself, it can't be held accountable in some of these cases? So I think there was an effect. I think ultimately the way Walmart handled it, though, they were able to get around it and get in front of it. And I think it ended up working out fairly well to their advantage.
Right, and a good example of that, you mentioned the stock prices that suffered initially, and I think we reported just last week they're approaching $100. I mean, they're reaching all-time high stock prices, so that's a perfect example of that.
Clearly they've overcome, at least in this case, and you know, the stock market's been doing very well in general, and I think Walmart would still like to be a little bit higher than they are. But clearly they've recovered from that as well.
All right, so $283 million, our Kim Souza reported for a possible settlement, and she's also reported in the past they've disclosed, you know, a cost of over $800 million in compliance fees and litigation. So you're talking about over $1 billion that's cost them in the dollars and cents and something really tangible. But you know, aside from the money, there have been other costs as well in a lot of different ways.
Oh, absolutely. I mean, clearly there was the whole investor confidence, stock price, as we talked about the supplier issues. But, you know, I think they paid a price in other ways too. Certainly their reputation was damaged by it. It's not just the people they work with and the suppliers, but it's the customers. People trust Walmart. And when Walmart has big negative headlines in the New York Times, people notice that. And then there's a pretty strong ripple effect for their human capital as well. If you kind of look at who were the key players at that time, there's been pretty big turnover
Not a lot
of
there
those
anymore,
folks.
right.
That's right.
Right. So, you know, from that perspective, the management perspective, something that you study, how has Walmart handled all those distractions? It seems to be, like we say, it hasn't been in the news, it hasn't hounded them, it's just something they've had to deal with more so internally in a lot of different areas for the past 6 years or so.
Right. I think, to their credit, Walmart realized they had a major problem. I mean, they had a legal problem, but they also had a reputational problem, a public relations problem. And, in kind of typical Walmart fashion, they kind of assessed and said, we really have to handle this the right way. So they replaced several of those people who were intimately involved. I think there was a kind of ripple effect that some of the other managers who maybe weren't directly involved but were responsible ultimately were replaced by other people. But, they, I think, did a couple of key things. One, they really focused on developing and kind of restructuring their compliance operation. They had pieces of compliance all over the organization. I think one thing Walmart loves to do is invest in retailing, merchant, those kinds of things. They're not so enamored with legal staffs and PR people. That was not in.
Didn't have a choice in this case.
Exactly,
Yeah.
exactly. That was not part of like Sam Walton's DNA. So, but Doug McMillon really dug in. He pulled things together. I think they centralized compliance. They had a lot of pieces of compliance around, but he really brought it all together and really heightened the emphasis on compliance. They also, got some really good attorneys to help them where they could fight the legal battles on those fronts. And in the end, I think they emerge a stronger company. They're certainly much more aware of these FPC issues, but they also, I think, have a much better handle on doing business internationally. You encounter something like this, and it's a real challenge for you. But if you do it thoughtfully, you emerge on the other side, I think, in a stronger position.
Right, and there are lessons learned. I mean, if anything, that comes from this. And, the Walmart leadership, as you know, they are big on leverage.
Absolutely.
So they're able to leverage these lessons that they've learned in a lot of different areas. So when it comes to their supplier partners, what lessons are there, if any, do they leverage there now that they see a possible light at the end of the tunnel?
Sure. I think, they probably do a pretty good job now of developing and identifying best practices from other vendors. Many of these companies have been overseas for years and years, and they have the expertise to handle these really sensitive, challenging questions. And there's probably been a little bit of, transfer of knowledge from Walmart to the vendor companies as well. And when Walmart learns tough lessons, I think they like to pass that along to the people who work with them. So I think you see it going both ways. Walmart, I think, is also really good about taking these general lessons and then applying them throughout their company. So even though these are, very specific international charges, you can apply some of that knowledge back to domestic operations as well. And again, I think the compliance operation they have now makes them stronger and makes them better able to cope with whatever might come next.
Right. And what's coming next, it sounds like, will be a resolution. Final thought here, like we said, Walmart had a lot of egg on its face when the New York Times story came out. But again, it's not something that they've had to deal with publicly, as much so as they've had to deal with it internally with all the compliance and legal issues. So, I would credit that as a win maybe in the public perception regard. So who gets credit for that? Maybe not financially, but in terms of perception,
Sure.
It seems like they've really come out ahead now that this is possibly going to come to a conclusion.
I totally agree. And I think it really starts at the top. You have to have strong ethical leadership. And I think Doug McMillon has stepped up and done that, and really sends a strong signal to the company that the way we handled this, ultimately we didn't equivocate. We recognized we had problems, we changed procedures, we cleaned house a little bit, and in the end we come back a strong company. And I think without that kind of executive leadership setting the path forward, it's very hard for people within the company to really get the strong message. But I think they did a really good job of turning what had been a very negative situation ultimately into one that's at least neutral or maybe even a little net positive for them.
All right, that's good stuff with Dr. Alan Ellstrand. He's the Associate Dean of the Walton College of Business at the University of Arkansas. We appreciate you being here.
Absolutely, my pleasure.
All right, and after the break, I will be joined by Kim Souza. Don't go away.
Arkansas Electric Cooperative Corporation provides electric energy across 2/3 of Arkansas. This is an exciting time in our energy history, with incredible progress being made in renewable energy and storage technologies. As our energy portfolio continues to diversify, we'll maintain an all-the-above strategy to provide reliable and affordable electricity. Ever since the first light bulbs were placed in our members' homes, the electric cooperatives have been the solutions provider for our members, and we want to continue that well into the future.
Each day, the promise of our nation begins again. Arkansas and America, moving forward. I help make that promise a reality. It's not for everyone, but people everywhere depend on us.
Oh, I love you too, sweetie.
Trucking delivers, or everything stops. And that's what drives me.
I did.
Welcome back to the supply side. I'm joined now by Kim Souza. And Kim, you have reported on this investigation from the get-go. What was the initial comment from company leaders, and kind of reconcile that with what they say today? How have they followed up on maybe some of the promises that they made in the early going?
Okay, in 2012 in June, the media asked Wal-Mart shortly after the story broke what they had to say on it. Doug McMillon, who was the CEO of Wal-Mart International at the time, stepped up to the microphone and said, I can't really give you a lot of details, but I will tell you that Wal-Mart does not tolerate this kind of fraud in our company, and we're going to do everything we can to get to the bottom of this situation. He said, and I quote, "A moment like this causes you to be on your toes and look for opportunities to get stronger anywhere you can, and that is our objective." He reiterated that integrity was important to the company, and it was at the core of their principles, and that they would get to the bottom of it. Well, in June, this past June, I asked Doug McMillon again, what have you learned in this 6 years? He said they had learned a great deal. He said, really, we are much stronger for having gone through this. It has had its challenges. We've spent a lot of money. They've spent $1.1 billion so far on this issue. But he said they've learned a great deal from it, and that Wal-Mart will be stronger going forward. He again said we will not tolerate any fraud and bribery, and everybody who was quasi-implicated is now removed from the company.
Right, and I think another point to bring up is, this hasn't really been like front page news for Wal-Mart, over these past 5 or 6 years as it was initially when the story in the New York Times broke. I mean, the coverage has tapered off, and it hasn't really hounded Wal-Mart for the last 5 years. But there are those experts from the Federal Corrupt Practices Act who are keeping an eye on this every day.
Sure.
What do those folks say that you talk to?
Okay, the foremost FCPA professor expert, Mike Kohler, has said many times Wal-Mart really handled this about as well as they could. They self-reported the infraction in the fall of 2011. He said they have done everything by the book since that time. He said it's going to be costly to them, and we've said $1.1 billion so far, but for Wal-Mart, that's really a drop in the bucket. Their sales last year were $460–70 billion for 1 year. So it's not too expensive in terms of money. The learnings really could benefit Wal-Mart in the long term, and that's what Kohler said. If Wal-Mart can learn from this and be an example in retail, that would be great for them.
All right, and we'll be watching for the next shoe to drop, hopefully the last shoe to drop in this long-running investigation. Kim Souza, thanks for your insights.
Sure.
All right, and we've got more on this story at our sister website at talkbusiness.net. I'm Paul Gatling. Thanks for watching.